Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning, a very good day to all of you. Welcome to today's lecture. My name is Dr. Muhammad Razif, and this session we will be examining a topic that sits at the very heart of Islamic intellectual traditions, that the relationship between Usuluddin and Shariah, the sciences of faith and the sciences of law. Now, this might sound like a dry and technical subject, but I want you to appreciate from the outset that what we are really talking about is one of the most profound questions in Islamic thought. How do we know what God requires of us, and why does it obligate us? That question is theological before it is legal, and that is precisely what makes this relationship so important. By the end of this lecture, I want you to be able to do three things. First, explain the classical relationships between Usuluddin and Shariah and why they were historically unified. Second, articulate the key theological debates, particularly around reason, revelation, and the nature of good and evil that shape Islamic jurisprudence. And third, evaluate how contemporary scholars use Maqasid al-Shariah to bridge these two disciplines and address the challenges of the modern world. Okay, let us begin. The first thing I want you to understand is that the separation of between Usuluddin and Shariah, between theology and law, between Aqidah and Shariah, is to a significant extent a later development in Islamic intellectual history. It was not always this way. Until approximately the 9th century of the Common Era, that is the early Abbasid period, both theological principles and legal practices were treated under one general heading, that is fiqh. Now, when we hear the words fiqh today, we immediately think of Islamic law, rulings on prayer, trade, nikah, inheritance. But in its earliest usage, fiqh had a much broader meaning. It referred to a deep understanding, a comprehensive comprehension of the religion in both its inner and outer dimensions. That is why we come to know that Imam Abu Hanifah named his book on theology Fiqhul Akbar. Fiqhul Akbar. So he wrote on theology, on Aqidah, but the book's name is Fiqhul Akbar. So the greatest fiqh, that is Aqidah. And if we refer to the earlier text, theological text, treatises of the predecessors, imams, we will see lots of texts or treatises named al-Shariah. Al-Shariah, that means Aqidah. They discuss on Aqidah, but they give a name al-Shariah to the books. It was only gradually as Islamic scholarship became more specialized and institutionalized that these two domains, the theological and legal, began to diverge into separate disciplines with their own methodologies, their own canons, their own scholarly guilds, so to speak. But here is the crucial point for our discussion today. Even if after this disciplinary separation occurred, the two fields never became truly independent of one another. They remain in a relationship of functional interdependence. Theology, or Usuluddin, encompassing Aqidah and Kalam, provides the ontological and logical foundations upon which the law rests. You cannot fully understand why the Sharia obligates in the way it does without understanding the theological premises that underpin it. This is why classical scholars sometimes describe Usuluddin as the crown of the religious sciences, the Sharaf al-Ulum, the most recall noble knowledge. It depends. It defends the logical assumptions of the unalterable principles of faith that the entire edifice of the Sharia depends upon. Okay, let us now go deeper into this relationship by examining how specific theological debates directly shape the nature of Islamic law. Perhaps the most fundamental link between kalam and fiqh concerns a question that sounds almost philosophical. Are things good or evil in themselves, or are they good or evil because God says so? In classical Islamic theology, this is framed as the debate over al-husn wal-qubuh, the nature of good and bad. And the two great theological schools answered this question very differently, with enormous consequences for how they understood the role of human reason in the law. The Mu'tazilites argued that good and evil are inherent properties of acts. An act of justice is good in itself, and acts of cruelty is bad in itself. And humanism is capable of recognizing this independently of revelation. This implication for law is significant. If reason can identify moral goodness, then reason can, in principle, serve as legislative agent. It can help us discover God's law, even in the absence of explicit scriptural guidance. The Ash'arites, by contrast, took a very different position. They maintain that good and evil are determined by solely by divine command, by what the Shara or the sacred law says. There is no inherent moral quality in acts independent of God's designation. An act is good because God has declared it good. It is bad because God has declared it bad. The consequence of this position is equally significant. So, reason alone cannot be a legislative agent. It cannot determine whether the law requires. Only revelation can do that. Now, all of you might wonder which position won out. Historically, the Ash'arite position became dominant in Sunni Islam, and this had a profound effect on the methodology of usul al-fiqh, the principle of jurisprudence. It meant that legal reasoning was anchored and at every step to scriptural sources, the Quran and the Sunnah, rather than being left to free rational deliberation. So this brings us to a second theological premise that shapes Islamic law, the doctrine of divine sovereignty, or al-Hakimiyah. Al-Hakimiyah. In Islamic theology, the fundamental premise is that God alone is the ultimate sovereign. Humans do not create law; they discover it. They uncover through the disciplined methodology of usul al-fiqh what God has already determined as hukumullah, or the rule of God. This is a deep theological conviction about the nature of authority, obligation, and the relationship between the creator and the creation. And this is precisely why kalam, or the speculative theology in Islam, is not peripheral to law but foundational to it. The theological assertion of God's sovereignty is what gives the entire enterprise of Islamic jurisprudence its raison d'etre and its ultimate justification. So, when I said raison d'etre, it is a France word, uh, meaning reason for being, raison d'etre. Okay, the reason for being. It refers to the fundamental purpose of primary justification for the existence of a person or a thing. Okay. At this point, I want to introduce a pivotal historical figure whose contribution is essential to understanding how theology and law became intertwined in Islamic intellectual history. Al-Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, the founder of the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence, who died in year 204 after Hijrah. Al-Shafi'i played decisive role, a decisive role in what scholars have called the theologization of Islamic law. Before Shafi'i, Islamic legal practice was, in many ways, what we call immanent. It was rooted in the living traditions of particular communities, the practices of Medina, Amal Ahl Medina, and the customary reasoning of local scholars. So it was embedded in social reality. So what Shafi'i did, he shifted this. He argued systematically and rigorously that all legal rules are internal to divine speech. That is, they derive from bayan, the clarification provided by God through the Quran and authenticated Sunnah of the Prophet. Islamic law, in his framework, became a transcendent object of study, derived from above rather than emerging from below. The implication of this were very profound. For Ash-Shafi'i, using erroneous methods of legal reasoning was not merely an intellectual mistake. According to him, it was something far more serious, and it was potentially impious. It was an attempt, however unintentional, to usurp divine authority, to substitute human judgment for divine command. In this sense, methodology in law became a matter of religious obligation. It is not merely an intellectual preference. So this is a remarkable claim, and it illustrates with great clarity how deep theology and law are intertwined in the Islamic intellectual tradition. So, okay, we come to the fourth part. Let us now step back and look at the overall architecture of the relationship between these two disciplines. While Usuluddin and Shariah are, in the classical period, treated as distinct disciplines with distinct methods, distinct questions, and also distinct authorities, they interact continuously through the medium of usul al-fiqh, or the principles of jurisprudence. Usul fiqh is, in a sense, the bridge. It provides the logical and epistemological tools developed partly in the dialogue with kalam, through which legal scholars derive rulings from scriptural sources. The categories of usul fiqh, the theory of legal obligation, the typology of divine commands, the epistemology of textual evidence, are all deeply informed by theological premises. There is also a distinction of domain and register between the two disciplines. Fiqh is concerned primarily with the overt acts of people, with prayers and fasting, with contracts and transactions, nikah and talaq, crime, al-jinayah, and also punishment. It organizes the external social order, while Usuluddin, on the other hand, is concerned with the inner life, with faith, belief, and the defense of the fundamentals of the creed, or iman. There is also a distinction of certainty. I mean the epistemic certainty. Theology deals with what must be held with certainty of truth. matter concerning God's existence, His attributes, the prophethood of Muhammad, the reality of the hereafter. They are not matters of probability, so they admit no wavering. Jurisprudence, by contrast, often operates in the domain of zan, a probable opinion. A jury issues a fatwa that is the most likely correct ruling given by the available proof or evidence. Another jurist may reach a different conclusion. So this is entirely normal and is structurally built into the system of ijtihad and juristic uh, disagreement or ikhtilaf. So understanding this distinction in register is essential for postgraduate students like all of you working in either theology or law because it tells you something important about what kind of claim you are making when you assert a theological position versus a legal one. Okay, so we come to the now to the contemporary dimension of our topic, and this is perhaps the most intellectually exciting parts of this lecture, I think. So modern scholars, and here we are talking about figures such as al-marhum Sheikh Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Dr. Jasir Auda, who's now is in ISTAC, IIUM, and Tariq Ramadan, and others working in the tradition of Maqasid scholarship have argued that the historical gap between the theoretical concerns of Usuluddin and practical applications of Sharia has become a significant problem. The separation between theory and social reality has hindered the capacity of Muslim community to respond effectively to the demands of the contemporary lives. This is what they have been argued for a long time. So their primary tool for bridging this gap is, for surely Maqasid Sharia, the higher objectives of Islamic law. Um, the Maqasid approach insists that Islamic law must be understood uh, through the purposes and objective those rulings are designed to achieve. The law exists to serve the welfare of humanity, or in the term we call it maslahah. And any ruling that results in manifest injustice, harm, or mischief cannot genuinely represent the Sharia. This is a theologically grounded claim. It connects directly to the discussion of al-husn wal-qubuh that we have mentioned before, and also we have examined earlier. By asserting that the law is oriented towards human good, Maqasid scholars are in effect arguing that there is a correspondence between the divine intent embedded in revelation and the genuine interests of created beings. Contemporary scholars use Maqasid to develop what some theorists have called a soft natural law theory of, of practical reasoning. The idea is this: in situations where scriptural things are silent or ambiguous, scholars can use Maqasid to justify the role of human reason in deriving appropriate rulings as a vehicle for discerning the divine will. Crucially, this approach attempts to fuse facts and value. Because the natural world is created by God and is, in that sense, purposeful and good, reason, observation of reality, like scientific, sociological, and medical, can be transformed into inputs for normative legal reasoning. Divine sovereignty is preserved because the scope of reason is always bounded by the intent of the lawgiver. But reason is genuinely empowered with those bounds. Uh, the primary analytical tool of Maqasid scholarship is the five fundamental values that all of us know: the preservation of life, lineage of progeny, property, the intellect, and also the religion. These five categories were first systemized by Al-Ghazali and have been the subject of considerable expansion and reinterpretation by modern scholars. For instance, Jas Rauda has proposed reconceptualizing them uh, as things to be developed and promoted. By working through these universal categories, contemporary scholars are able to search for common ground between Islamic law and modern global frameworks like human rights, discourse, constitutional governance, equality before the law, freedom of conscience. So these are not on the Maqasid view, alien importations into Islamic thought. They are realizations of what the law has always been oriented towards. Uh, okay, so let me conclude with what I think is the broadest and most significant dimensions of our topic today: the civilizational and global implications. The civilizational and global implications of integrating Sharia and Usuluddin, or specifically Islamic thought. Uh, First is universal moral values. The core of Sharia, when properly understood through its high objective or Maqasid Sharia, is grounded in wisdom, justice, mercy, and the common good. These are all parochial values. They are values with universal resonance. When Islamic thought prioritizes these higher objective, it becomes possible to assert that Islamic law, at its highest level or deepest level, aligns with humanity's most essential moral intuitions like freedom, dignity, and also tolerance. Second, human development as a legal objective. Contemporary Islamic scholarship has begun to expand the scope of Maqasid to include human development as a primary objective of the law in its own right. This is significant development. It means that the realization of the Sharia can be in part empirically measured through indicators of literacy, political participation, gender equity, and also economic opportunity. It is an assertion that the divine intent behind revelation is the flourishing human beings, and that we have more tools today than ever before to measure whether that flourishing is actually been achieved. Third, peace, coexistence, and intrafaith unity. A Maqasid based approach also has important implications for how Muslims navigate plurality between both different religious communities and within the Muslim community itself. Focusing on the higher purposes of the Sharia rather than the literal forms, it becomes possible to engage in genuine dialogues across traditions to find common ground. It is also provided. Provides resources for addressing historical sectarian divisions, the tensions between Sunni and Shia, for instance, or between different legal schools, Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, Hanbali, look very different when viewed through the lens of the shared higher objective like justice, unity, and the common good, rather than through the lens of contested historical positions. Okay, and last, the integration of religion, reason, and science. Finally, the Maqasid framework, as developed by contemporary scholars, proposes what we might call an open system of law, one that is genuinely in dialogue with the natural and social sciences. Legal decisions that bear on empirical realities like medical ethics, environmental stewardships, economic policy benefits from scientific input. This does not compromise the theological authority of the Sharia, but it enriches its application. And philosophically, this openness ensures that Islamic legal theory remains alive. So, capable of self renewal, capable of engaging with global intellectual developments capable of speaking to every generation, not merely a historical artifact, but as a living traditions. So let me summarize what we have covered today. But we began by noting that Usuluddin and Shariah shared a common origin. So both emerged from the broader concept of fiqh as comprehensive religious understanding. So I then examine how specific theological debates, particularly around al-husn al-qubuh and divine sovereignty, directly shape the architecture and methodology of Islamic law. We saw how Ash-Shafi'i theologized the law by grounding all really legal rules in divine speech, making methodology itself a matter of religious obligation. When we then identified the structural relationship between the two disciplines, mediated through usul al-fiqh, and the distinctions between their domains and their registers. So finally, examine how contemporary scholars use Maqasid Sharia as a philosophical bridge to close the gap between theology and law, to ground legal reasoning in higher objective, and to make Islamic intellectual tradition a living resource for addressing the challenge of the modern world. So, to all my students, for your reflection this week, I want you to consider the following questions. To what extent does Maqasid Sharia approach genuinely breach theology and law? And to what extent does it risk reducing theology to an instrumental role in the service of legal reform? That tension, I think, is one of the most productive questions in contemporary Islamic thought. So, I look forward to discussing your thoughts in maybe in our next session or next meeting outside class. Inshallah. Until then, take care and assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.